I read a lot of autobiographies, and in particular, I read a lot of autobiographies written by actors. So I thought I would rank my top 10 favorite actors' autobiographies. I'm going to give them all a rating out of 10, and hint, I'm saving my favorite one for the end. Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. Friends is one of my favorite TV shows, if not my favorite TV shows, and Chandler is my favorite character from that show, so I was very excited when Matthew Perry finally announced his autobiography. I listened to the audiobook, which I'm glad I did because Matthew Perry reads it and he performs it very well. But if you're going to read it for some fun behind the scenes of Friends stories, this is not that book. He talks about Friends a bit, how could he not? But really the book is mostly about his battle with addiction. This has been the overwhelming force in his life, and he speaks incredibly honestly and personally about this struggle. Really feel for him and the struggle he's gone through with his addiction. And you know, he's in a very privileged position of having a lot of money to try and help him battle against this addiction, which obviously a lot of people aren't in the same boat. But I recommend this book to any Friends fan, definitely any Matthew Perry fan, and also anyone interested in hearing about the story of someone struggling with addiction and especially trying to do it in the public eye. It's eye-opening and it's quite moving at times. And I would give Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing an 8 out of 10. A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney. This isn't an autobiography per se, it's the story of his son Henry, who was diagnosed with a brain tumor when he was 1 and died 2 years later. It is a devastating read, there is no denying that. I was on the verge of tears many times while listening to it. I did listen to it, I got the audiobook. Again, I'm really glad because Rob Delaney reads it and reads it very well. He lets you in on this incredibly intimate story and he leaves out no heartbreaking detail. But Rob Delaney is a comedian, and there are times where you will find yourself laughing on one page and then being on the verge of tears on the next. He brings in brief moments of levity in what is otherwise a very heavy book, and I think he does a great job of it. Also, weirdly, for a book written by an American, it made me very proud to be British because he talks a lot about the NHS and how amazing it is. I too think our NHS is fantastic, and hearing him praise it really warmed my heart. I would recommend this book to everyone and anyone. It's a powerful book and it's just a good book. I think trying to describe it as like amazing or fantastic doesn't feel right because those words don't really get a sense of the gravity of this book, but it's excellent. I can highly recommend it. It's a 10 out of 10 book from me. Stories I Only Tell My Friends by Rob Lowe. I don't know how Rob Lowe did it, but he basically came in contact with everyone who was anyone in Hollywood in the 80s and the 90s. So as you can imagine, this leads to some incredible stories. And reading this genuinely does feel like you're sitting with him at a party and he's telling you about this crazy thing he did with Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez back when they were younger. The stories are unbelievably believable, and it is just a straight up joy to read. This book was written a while ago though, so don't expect anything from Parks and Rec or anything more recent because they just didn't exist yet. I'd recommend this book for any Rob Lowe fans, absolutely, and anyone interested in what Hollywood was like in the 80s and 90s. Also, I think for budding actors, because Rob Lowe's passion for acting really comes across in this book. I give Stories I Only Tell My Friends a 8 out of 10. Lucky Man by Michael J. Fox. This is his first autobiography, and it finishes around 2003. He's recently released a new one, which I haven't read, but I am intrigued to see, does it just pick up where he left off, or does he sort of explain everything again? The book is understandably very focused on his Parkinson's. He gives an honest insight into the timeline of first realizing something was wrong through to his diagnosis and acceptance of the disease. There are lots of really interesting stories in there. There's a fascinating chapter where he talks about the brain surgery he has and he reveals some really interesting details about it. There's also a story about the lengths that the paparazzi went to get photos of his wedding, including like dressing up as llamas. Back to the Future perhaps doesn't get as many pages as you'd expect, so it's not a book to go into if you want like the day-by-day production stories of that trilogy. He comes across as very hardworking and someone who's really learnt from the mistakes they made when they were younger. And when it comes to the bits where he's sort of being very introspective about his Parkinson's, he comes across as very humble and incredibly human. It is sad hearing about his optimism for finding a cure for Parkinson's, because he talks about you know, in the next decade or two, there might be a cure. And here we are 20 years after he wrote the book. And although science has progressed, unfortunately, we're yet to find a cure. I definitely recommend this to any Michael J. Fox fans or anyone interested in getting an insight into someone struggling with Parkinson's and also someone struggling in the public eye and how he felt about having to reveal that. I give Lucky Man by Michael J. Fox a 7 out of 10. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. My word, I don't quite know how to put my thoughts about this book into words. It's very good. It is a powerful book and it's a heavy book, but I couldn't put it down. It was engrossing. It's an unflinching account of her struggles as a former child actor, her eating disorders, her addictions, and her complicated relationship with her abusive mother. I listened to it as an audiobook and she reads it, and this is one of those I really highly recommend listening to it if you get the chance, because how she delivers it is exceptional. And yeah, it's just she does such a good job. Although she does mix in some dark humor, as suggested by the title, it really is still a heavy book. Where Rob Delaney's book makes you cry and curse the universe for how unfair it is, Jeanette McCurdy's shocks you and horrifies you in different ways, and it just makes you wish that there is nothing but kindness, love, and peace for her in the rest of her life. I give I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy a 9 out of 10. Home by Julie Andrews, and also Homework by Julie Andrews. I actually read both of Julie Andrews' autobiographies. I much preferred her first one to her second one. Her first one ends with her on the plane to LA to go film her first big Hollywood role, Mary Poppins. And I found her childhood and her theatre years far more interesting and relatable than the heartbreak over having to sell her family yacht, which is, not kidding, a story that takes up a good couple of pages in her second book. Julie Andrews grew up in wartime Britain, which was, as you could imagine, really interesting to read about, and she was actually born only a couple of towns over from where I was born. Her stories about World War II were fascinating, as were her stories about being a young teenager performing in theatres and basically becoming the family's main breadwinner before she hit 20. This, along with her quite complicated family dynamic, made for a riveting read. Unfortunately for me, the second book didn't hold up, despite me being incredibly interested in Hollywood at that time and her roles that she took on. I just never connected with it like I did with her first book. I would definitely recommend her first book, but not so sure about her second book. Home, I give an 8 out of 10. Homework, I give a 6 out of 10. Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. This is a funny, wholesome book, and it is no less or no more than you think it would be. I'm a huge Anna Kendrick fan, so I was going to enjoy this book regardless, and her wit and her natural charisma does come through. I listen to this and she reads it and performs it very well, and she is very funny. The book is actually in this essay kind of format, but it's all relatively chronological, so you kind of forget about that after a while, particularly when you're listening to it. She tells some good stories. She tells a great story about performing at the Oscars and a very intimate, touching story about losing her grandmother. Although Anna Kendrick has some great stories to tell from her life, I'm not sure she has a story to tell, if that makes sense. Jeanette McCurdy has a story to tell. Rob Delaney has a story to tell, but I'm not sure Anna Kendrick does. Perhaps it's because she's still relatively young, but there was nothing really in this book that excelled it into the upper echelons of best autobiographies I've ever read. If you're hoping for a fun, light-hearted, entertaining read though, I can definitely recommend this book. And of course, it's an absolutely must-read for any Anna Kendrick fans like myself. I give Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick a 7 out of 10. Still Fooling Them by Billy Crystal. This is such a sweet book. Billy Crystal comes across as genuinely the nicest guy. Also, unlike a few names on this list, he's old. So he actually has like almost his entire life to look back on, which I did appreciate. The book is very well written. His passions become your passions. His love for baseball just leaps off of the page and into your heart. However, there were a couple of chapters that he recorded in front of a live audience, which I didn't quite love, because one of the things I like about an audiobook is that it's almost as if the author is just reading it directly to you, and so having these bits with sort of like a laughter track and a live audience kind of broke that connection for me, which I didn't love. I was inspired to read this autobiography because I watched his one-man show 700 Sundays, which is absolutely fantastic. It was a stage show on Broadway, but HBO have recorded it and released it, so if you can watch that, I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, his autobiography did not disappoint. His sweet-hearted demeanor just makes for such a lovely read. Even if you're only vaguely interested in Billy Crystal, I'd still recommend this book. I give Still Fooling Them an 8 out of 10. You Can't Be Serious by Carl Penn. What interested me most about Carl Penn's book was the fact that he'd worked in both Hollywood and in the White House, which is a rare feat for someone. So I was really interested to hear how that transition was and what it was like being a relatively famous person while working in the White House. And on that, this book does not disappoint. He talks about that transition and what it was like working in the Obama White House. He also discusses the racism that he faced early in his career in Hollywood and his struggle to be cast in anything but offensive stereotypes. My favorite bit though was him talking about his relationship and how he met his now partner Josh. It was all very sweet and it made for a wholesome read, that bit in particular. It's definitely worth reading if you're a Carl Penn fan, and if you're like me and you're interested in that connection and relationship between Hollywood and Washington, I can definitely recommend this. I give You Can't Be Serious by Carl Penn a 7 out of 10. And finally, my favorite actor's autobiography, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. This is not only my favorite actor's autobiography I've ever read, it's probably my favorite autobiography I've ever read, and it's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I'd recommend this book to anyone, Matthew McConaughey fan or not. It's part self-help book, part autobiography, although self-help isn't quite the right term. I think it's more like Matthew McConaughey giving his views and thoughts on the world and life and just offering us his philosophy on things. Some of the stories in this book do seem too good to be true, but I choose to believe them. Just like at the end of Life of Pi, I choose to believe the stories as he tells them. He is a master storyteller, and it's impossible not to be caught up in his zest for life when you're reading this book. I've never read a book twice in my entire life, but I could imagine myself in a few years' time coming back to read this book just to relive those stories and be inspired all over again. I give Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey 10 out of 10. It is a brilliant book. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have you read any of these books? I'd love to know what you thought about them. Or have you read any other actors' autobiographies? I'd love to know what you thought about those as well in the comment section down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.